Good, good. Could you keep my introduction short, please? Just say
I'll keep it
financial analyst.
very,
I don't
very,
want to have
very.
a long, long thing with this beat.
I actually wrote the introductions very short this time. Brevity will be the order of the day. So we'll go now.
The Guyana Business Journal and the Caribbean Policy Consortium presents Transforming Guyana. In each episode, Dr. Blackman and Dr. Lewis will tackle a different area of interest for transforming Guyana.
Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 8 of the Guyana Business Journal and Caribbean Policy Consortium webinar series, Transforming Guyana. First off, let me say a Happy New Year to you all. I am Terrence Blackman, Chair and Associate Professor of Mathematics at Medgar Evers College in the City University of New York and the founder of the Guyana Business Journal. And as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. David Lewis of the Caribbean Policy Consortium and Manchester Trade. And I think today I should say that I want to welcome those of you here in the United States who are watching the program, those of you in Guyana, those of you in Trinidad and Tobago, those of you in Canada, and in the UK and in Jamaica who have registered for the program and are watching. As many of you know, this series Transforming Guyana really tries to bring together experts, prominent voices from Guyana, the Caribbean, and the diaspora to discuss the impacts of Guyana's oil and gas development. And we aim to offer a nuanced look at the opportunities and potential pitfalls ahead for Guyana as we explore strategies to maximize the positive impacts that the oil revenues can have on Guyana's people and future, while mitigating the risks that other countries have faced. And as is always our case since we come to you from the diaspora, to try to identify roles that the diaspora can play in this context. Today, we want to examine Guyana's journey towards being a destination of choice for investors, both foreign and domestic. And our conversation will be led by, and I was told to minimize the long introductions, which sometimes I think is important, but I will. Miss Patricia Francis, the chairperson of Trade Facilitation Task Force and former executive director of ITC. Miss Rosalinda Rasul, head of the Diaspora Unit of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Guyana. Miss Stacy Mollison, president and CEO of the Libra Management Group. And Mr. Joel Bagwandin, Director of Spherix Professional Services and a financial analyst. David, can you bring a word of 2024 welcome, and then we'll push on.
Thank you, Terrence. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us as speakers on this session today, and to our audience in Guyana, the diaspora internationally. Welcome to the launch of 2024 in our Transforming Guyana series this year. So hope everyone is well, had an excellent holiday season. We've touched on investment issues and business climate many times in our, almost 20 programs now. On and off. And that's why we decided to start this year with just one program only on the investment promotion, investment situation in Guyana in terms of the market, attraction of investors, and really get a perspective both from public-private sector in Guyana, but also experiences from the rest of the region over these past decades in terms of building institutions, organizations, uh, regulatory environment, business facilitation environment for investment. And I particularly have harped on the issue that pretty much we need to start looking at the investment climate and the economy in Guyana to a certain degree beyond oil and gas, because to various degrees, the oil and gas economy, the oil and gas investment is pretty much capped out and established. And we need to start looking at the non-oil and gas economy in Guyana, and particularly the investment climate, the investment opportunities without in the sectors that don't have an anchor major global like Exxon, or since the end of last year, now Chevron. And basically that means looking at, yes, the energy sector, the non-oil and gas energy sector, and the linkages it has with the oil and gas economy. But then likewise for manufacturing, agribusiness, services, as we've been seeing, including tourism, information technologies, as well as education and training, which have been big issues coming up in the country. And then, of course, infrastructure, including everything from construction, logistics, transportation. We've seen the announcements last week, early this week, about the new highway projects in Guyana, and the fact of really preparing the country for this growth in a variety of sectors, which are not only in the oil and gas sectors, as I've mentioned. And two factors which I think we should try and focus on today and discuss between ourselves and with our audience. One, what does this mean in terms of the environment for ease of doing business and business facilitation in Guyana? If you're Exxon or if you're Chevron, in any market in the world, yes, it makes a difference if it's everything functions nicely like Singapore, or if it doesn't, like in some other country. But at the end of the day, you are a major global player and you will find ways to make things work. If you're Manchester Trade, that's not the case. You have to really rely on being sure that the country offers the different business facilitation, ease of doing business initiatives, and regulatory, legal environment that you can operate in with success. Item one. Item two, which really has now been coming forth on the agenda and the government is tackling frontally, I'm pleased to say, everything having to do with workforce development and the need for skilled labor in a variety of many of these sectors. Because again, much of that is going and being swallowed up by the oil and gas sector, and then we have the rest of the economy. So those are two issues that I think harp on the whole question of the non-oil and gas sector and investment opportunities. And hopefully we can have some discussion on that. I think it's going to be incredibly important this year. The government is focusing on many of these initiatives, the private sector in Guyana, both the national private sector and the regional and international private sector that is there now and expanding that economy. And these are factors which we've seen in other markets, both in the Caribbean and internationally, which are critical in terms of making that successful growth economy take place. And at the end of the day, as Terence mentioned, that these benefits accrue to the people of Guyana and the country of Guyana in general. So thank you again for joining us, and we hope to have an excellent discussion today.
Thank you, David. And so perhaps you've given us a really wonderful introduction. And maybe what I want to do here is to, really jump to Joel to kind of give us a macroeconomic sense of where we are in terms of the investment environment. Joel, as I kind of wanted to cue you in, I wanted to talk through just, really just three things. What are some of the merits of investing in Guyana and natural resources, this emerging economy, broadly sort of geopolitical stability, which is kind of unraveling just a little bit. the investment incentives that the government is and its strategic location, and then some of the demerits. Maybe you can cue what you say, what David has just talked to, kind of the dependency on oil, in the sense that we don't want to be too over reliant on it. Some of the infrastructure challenges which are being addressed, and broadly questions of bureaucracy, potential corruption that one might find in this context, some of the environmental concerns, the limited market size in the Guyanese context, and then broadly, so security and crime. So I want to cue you and just have you talk through, set the stage for us. Where are we on Guyana's journey towards being a destination of choice for people wanting to invest their money? Joel?
Thank you very much, Dr. Blackman. Let me say first, Happy New Year to all of your viewers and the other panelists here with me today, your distinguished panelists, that is. It is always a pleasure to share this platform with you and your very distinguished guests from time to time. First, as you mentioned, the geopolitical dimension of the investment climate in Guyana, I would like to firstly speak to that from the perspective of what was the impact. That is the first thing investors tend to ask, before we had the geopolitical maneuverings developing or intensifying of recently, international investors are always concerned primarily about political risks in the market in which they are, contemplating to invest. Now we are not only looking at political risk at a domestic level, but broader geopolitical developments. And I would say that so far, fortunately, it has the developments that occurred over the last few months did not really impact the business climate in an adverse way, in the sense of impacting negatively investors' confidence. There were some concerns that emanated from within the domestic sphere, but those were quickly contained. And of course, it was not contained by way of mere narrative or rhetoric on the part of policymakers. It was contained largely on the part of the policymakers' diplomatic efforts, which the entire world witnessed all the developments that took place, which led to the two leaders meeting in St. Vincent, from which there was the Argyle Declaration. And I think the spirit of that, the objective of that meeting, which manifested into the declaration, which was to de-escalate tensions and to maintain peace and stability within the region, that was largely achieved. So against that background, politically at this time, geopolitically at this time, there are no concerns really, or much fear on the part of investors. The country, in terms of the government, there is no pause on development activities. In fact, the budget 2024 is scheduled to be tabled in the National Assembly on the 15th of this month, and we expect a significantly larger budget than the previous fiscal year, which is last year, considering there were, I think, following the approval of the budget, you had about 3 or 4 additional requests by way of supplementary approval for additional funds in the National Assembly throughout the year. So we can expect a larger budget to continue the aggressive pace of investment in the economy. So now so having said that as my opening remark, let me now take a step back and speak to your broader questions in terms of the investment climate on some specific things. The Before I talk about the macroeconomic indicators, let me say that the important thing for investors, whether local or foreign investors, is always, while the the economic environment is always within on is always characterized as uncertainties. You can't predict the future. You can't predict, uncertain events, adverse events. Notwithstanding that, you require some degree of predictability, and that has to be largely stimulated and driven by the policymakers. And towards that end, Guyana's economic development started a long time ago. I'm not going to get into the intricacies of the challenges. I'm only going to say for now that our development journey that is being ramped up, that is being accelerated at a very, very rapid pace today, it started 3 decades ago. And it started in a time where we had tremendous economic and political challenges. There was a time when we were a bankrupt economy. We had to first of all transition out of that. We transitioned out of a different economic and political system to a democratic system, to a market economy system, to achieving, maybe 2 decades after the post 1992 era, economic stability and strong macroeconomic indicators in terms of GDP, inflation, balance of payments compared to the historic events. Today, even before we discovered crude in 2014, the macroeconomic indicators then were very strong. We had we had about $100 billion liquid cash in the bank. I'm talking about government funds. This was in 2014. All the economic sectors were performing relatively well, save and except some sectors experience seasonal decline, such as agriculture. So you expect that in certain sectors, but overall the economy was experiencing strong growth. Construction, infrastructure, services, all the other sectors. Fast forward to today, from the discovery of oil in 2015 to moving to production in 2019, December of 2019, to where we are today. Our GDP has more than tripled from 4 billion to over 14 billion as of 20. Well, that is, I'm relying on 2022 figures because the 2023 data is not out as yet. But based on the projected growth, you can calculate from where the GDP has moved from 4 billion to 14 billion to where we are today. So it is more than tripled. Inflation relative to the global average has remained below the global average. Only a few days ago, I put out a report on the impact of the cost of living interventions implemented by the government to help to cushion or subside, the impact of that. And you got to look at that from a global context, from a global perspective. And the global perspective is that some countries are having one country had 300% inflations. You have about 10 countries in have over 200% inflation rate. So the rest of the world not doing so well in terms of inflationary pressures and cost of living, burden on the population. We have done fairly well compared to the rest of the region and the rest of the world by extension, and that is largely because of government's intervention. And in the report which I did, the assessment which I did, you look at all of the government policies, which include policies that would have resulted in foregone revenue to the Treasury. For example, they reduced the excise tax on fuel imports from 50% down to 0%. That effectively results in foregone revenue of maybe 20 to $40 billion a year. So that is an example of some of the measures and the effect. And altogether, the sum total altogether, it's close to $190 billion a year, which is about 63% of the natural resource fund balance as of 2022, and about 6% of our overall GDP as of 2022. So there were great efforts on the part of the government of the day in terms of confronting the challenges brought upon us by rising cost of living, which is a global issue, but in our case, that was compounded by the fact that we have strong demand in the domestic economy as well because of what is taking place, because of the aggressive development, increase in disposable income across the sectors. You have the strong demand would drive that. So this is why the rapid investment on the supply side to increase production, food production, agriculture, building the infrastructure out to support the growth, the reducing energy costs, the transformational projects to reduce energy costs, all those are important towards the medium to long term. So having said that, on the macroeconomic side of of the state of the economy as we speak today, inflation rate is below the global average. The central bank foreign reserve is relatively at a decent level, over 500 million, but that is excluding the balance in the natural resource fund. If we add the balance in the natural resource fund, we can say that the net foreign asset of the country plus the commercial bank's net foreign assets is north of $1 billion US, maybe over 2 billion US. So those are strong indicators. Our export commodities are growing. And of course, for this year, the GDP growth is projected to be in the region of 30%. Unemployment, well, speaking of the challenges, in what I've just said, I pretty much talk about some of the challenges or reference some of the challenges. But the main challenge as of now, in terms of investors, in terms of the private sector, is the skills deficit that we have. And it is a twofold challenge. One, we have a skills deficit, shortage of the skills that we need in all the sectors. And two, we have a skills mismatch, meaning that we have people looking for work, actively looking for work, but the jobs that are available, they don't have the skills and competencies to match that. So it's a twofold problem, and that is a major issue right now, that the policymakers and private sector are collaborating on to deal with. Of course, on the policy front, to address that, the government has commissioned some studies on the labor market, which would inform their policy making on the skills development front, investing in human resources. The president has announced that they would start to implement in a phased manner free tertiary education from this year. There's as part of their promise, their manifesto promise, they did promise free tertiary education by 2025. That seems to be manifesting to reality. That is in addition to the scholarship, which amounted to over 200,000 scholarship that they have granted so far. And so that's on the academic side. In terms of technical development, technical training, the technical institutes, the oil and gas companies are investing in some technical institutes to develop more technical skills such as engineering and IT and so on. So I'll pause there for now, and I'll leave the rest for you to ask questions as we
So
go.
But before we transition to Patricia, so there was a quick question on, the average global inflation rate versus Guyana's.
As of 2022, the average global inflation rate is 8.7%. 2022, our inflation was about 5.3%. This year, inflation, the global inflation rate is projected to slow to maybe 5%, and ours is projected to slow below 5%.
Yeah. So thanks. This is why I wanted to have this kind of conversation to start this off, right? So I think what many observers have, can find places of, places for criticism, places. But I think if you take this view of what's happening in Guyana, in the broad sense, these macroeconomic fundamentals seem to be in place for, to make it a very attractive destination. And so this is the question that I wanted to pose to you, Patricia, in order to sort of set the stage for us again. Now, looking from the sort of regional perspective, how do you see this, and then in what areas do you think ought to be amplified? What things ought to be mitigated in order to better position Guyana as a destination of choice for investment as we go through the next 5, 10, 15 years. Your volume is, you're muted.
Here we go.
Now you're fine. Yes.
Okay, fine. Thank you. And yes, Terrence, and thank you very much. And again, I want to repeat Happy New Year to everyone. And thank you very much for the invitation to be part of this discussion today. I just want to take off from where Joel left off. And the IMF has just come out with their report on Guyana and are indicating that they should probably have growth of about 26.6% this year. And of that, of course, the majority is in the oil and gas sector. But interestingly, they are saying that about 6.6% will be from the non-oil and gas, the domestic sector. And that's very interesting because that's a significant level of growth for the non-oil and gas sector, which is going to, I think, to be very important for the economy going forward. But of course, they do also speak to, and Joel did mention this, the effect that the government is actually taking to ensure that the economy doesn't overheat because of inflationary pressure, and of course, perhaps for an appreciation of the real exchange rate is possible based on the balances of expansion of the economy. So I think that this is something that we'll have to watch, and the government will have to really be managing very well going forward. But I don't think that we can forget about the risks, the geopolitical risks that are happening elsewhere in the world and how that may impact the economy itself as well. And in addition to that, this is an election year in many countries, specifically the main one being in the USA, in our region. And this is something which could have a major impact on what happens in the region going forward, depending on the outcome of that election. But with respect to Guyana's performance vis-a-vis the rest of the region, the runner-up to Guyana, we have it's almost disproportionate. Guyana is way out there in the 20s, and the closest one to that is Dominican Republic, which is projected to be at about 5% growth this year. So even the best other performing economy in the region is going to underperform the domestic performance of Guyana, which is really, really interesting. And of course, Jamaica is looking at about 2% growth this year. So we are looking at the star of the Caribbean, and the importance of Guyana for the region is obviously going to grow exponentially as the oil and gas sector rolls out, which is why the dispute with Venezuela is important for us to ensure that that does not escalate. And the region, of course, has been playing a role in that. And I think Brazil is also going to be throwing their hat into the process to try and see how we can stabilize that. So while I don't think that's going to have an impact on the oil and gas sector, it may have an impact as people want to watch the next couple of months to see what's happening, and there may be a slowdown in some of the things that perhaps will happen in the rest of the economy. So when again we look at Guyana compared to the rest of the Caribbean, again the big issue is how do we deal with the small domestic markets and generate enough scale within the region in order to ensure that the high fixed costs of establishing and operating business relative to the market size, together with the labor market rigidity, how we can remain competitive and incentivize diversification in the region. So I think that these are issues that we have right throughout the Caribbean. And of course, that's exaggerated by the poor transport and the digital connectivity with trading partners. And that presents a major barrier for trade and global value chain integration. I was very happy to see that, the governments of Trinidad, Guyana, and also Barbados have announced that they're going to be investing in a forest system, which may there's just a beginning of an announcement on it. I know that the Caribbean Development Bank had done some work on looking at how this could roll out, and of course this was a topic at the Afro-Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum, which took place in late October last year, where President Ali actually called on the private sector to put forward a proposal for an intra-regional system. But the governments themselves have gone ahead and said that they're going to be investing in a ferry service. Now that would have, for both passenger and for freight. So this would be very important, I think, for mitigating the huge transportation problem which we have in the Caribbean. Now, as far as strategies to expand the opportunities in the Caribbean, I think that it's some of the things that we should be looking at, that CARICOM should be moving forward on. The improved harmonization of regional investment codes. Everybody's doing their own thing. And this makes it very difficult for countries who are companies that want to invest regionally. So you have one set of rules in one country, another set of rules. And this is something that has been proposed from my days when I was back in JAMPRO, which ended in 2006. So many, many years later, we're still talking about the same kind of thing. So regulate the regulator environment and aligning that in the region and helping to reduce trade costs and strengthening domestic institutions. So I think all of this is very important. And we spoke about the infrastructure, the need for resilience now to be put into our infrastructure. It almost seems that in the region, we build infrastructure for today, and then we have a weather event and the infrastructure is demolished. So now we have to be looking at resilience when we are building our infrastructure. And I'm sure that this is something that the Guyanese government is looking at as we have to prepare for adaptation to climate change. So this, I think, is critical and important. But in terms of the business environment itself, Guyana has not really been doing very well when you look at when you look at the indicators by the World Bank looking at the business environment. And there seem to be still confusion with respect to multiple ministries that are overlapping in terms of regulatory responsibilities. And investors report that they receive confusing messages from various officials. So clarifying this and the whole business of building institutions is critical and important, because the reputation right now is that it's sort of a presidential cabinet that makes the decisions, all the decisions. And new investors and bidders say that it's opaque and slow. Additionally, I think some of the very positive things that I've seen is the emphasis of the Guyanese government on the diversification of the economy and looking at investment in other areas other than fossil fuels. So I think this is really, really important. And of course, modernizing the economy with respect to digitization will be critical and important. And this is something which is regionally important. There is a huge deficit in terms of our digitization right across the region, and that is absolutely impacting on our ability to be competitive and actually to look at how we're doing business. The other important thing which the government is doing, which I think is so critical and important, is looking at the environmental issues and creating a new incentive for a low carbon economy. I have read all the documents that the Guyana low carbon economy strategy is looking at, and I think that this is excellent and offers very great opportunities for the region. But finally, I will say that an important key thing for us to be looking at is the fact that by 2027, it is predicted that the small population of approximately 750,000 people will be producing more than 1.2 million barrels of oil a day. Now, sustaining inclusive growth will definitely necessitate a people policy linked to the growth strategy. And how to manage that growth strategy despite the small labor pool must address increased productivity and managed immigration policy. And then, of course, overcoming this limited human resource necessitates improvement in digital infrastructure and streamlining approval procedures. Strategies to overcome the absorptive capacity of government to manage investment flows while ensuring environmental protection and minimizing corruption. This is where I would suggest there needs to be significant investment and outreach to the best in the world to assist in this process, because the level of and pace of investment that we're talking about cannot be accomplished with small organizations that exist currently. It's going to fall apart. It's going to create problems for the country unless this area is strengthened significantly. So strengthening both domestic and foreign investment will play a pivotal role in the stabilizing of the potential growth output, and of course offering increased capacity for resource allocation, as already described by Joel. And I think the urgent policy decisions to create a conducive environment for capital and labor allocation with a focus on sustainable investments in human resource development will be critical for success going forward. So I'd stop there and say that I think that the huge opportunity that exists needs governance, good management, and it needs cooperation and coordination.
No, thank you, Patricia. You crystallized precisely for me the question that I wanted to put to Rosalinda. So you just said
Oh
it.
dear.
No. It's perfect. It's a perfect segue. So you have 800,000 people managing uh, 1 million barrels of oil per day. And it's clear that in addition to all of the other policies, you need a people resource policy.
Yep.
And so this is exactly where you come in here, Rosalinda. You are the person who is, in a sense, with a limited group of people, broadly the Guyanese diaspora. You're the one who's broadly shaping this sort of people resource policy. And so, tell us, about the work that you've been doing and how it kind of dovetails with this idea of Guyana as a investment destination of choice for investors in diaspora and beyond.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor, for having me on the program. This being your first one for the new year.
Yes.
It is a distinct honor to always share a platform with you. And also, I'm very much intrigued by the comments made by the two previous speakers. And it's some very good points came out from both speakers. And also, I'm sorry I can't see your audience, but to the diaspora that's joined in, it's always very good to engage you in different ways and different forums. This time, I'm actually the one doing the interview as opposed to me, doing it for other people. I am glad you mentioned what you mentioned, but before I actually get to that answer, it's very important to understand where we are and why we have chosen this path here. When the unit was first resuscitated in 2021, the general idea of how the diaspora unit should function and engage the diaspora was really to have sort of like a plan on paper, and then look at what is ordained within the different sectors on those paper and just go after the diaspora. We opted not to do that. That was more like sort of, for me, it was a parochial way of engaging the diaspora. And I thought when you read some of the suggestions that were in some of the papers in what would make effective diaspora engagement, I didn't think it was relevant to what was happening in the country. The country is now about to go on to something brand new that's exciting, and the dynamics have changed tremendously. Therefore, you'll need a new way to engage the diaspora. And what was that new? It was more or less to align their interest with the interest of the country and where it wants to go. So that was really the path that we took to engage the diaspora. So we didn't just say under sports there are 10 different things we wanted to accomplish, or investments there are 20 different things we wanted to accomplish. We first looked at what the government is doing for the country, where they're leading the country, and where can the diaspora play a part in that. And this brings me back right now to what you just asked, and I thought it made such beautiful sense, basically because when you talk about Guyana having a very small population, and then you have this really it's taken off in a massive growth rate, you will need a lot of skills. So we can choose to run after projects or initiative that is not exactly what would have a great impact on the country or what might be needed, or we can choose to engage the diaspora in a way that really help to re-energize the country and take it where it needs to go. One case in point would be the skill shortages, which again both speakers alluded to. In 2023, we started a conversation at the national level with private sector and public sector stakeholders on the shortages of skills in the country and what can be done to address it. More specifically, the role the diaspora can play in addressing it. What we didn't realize, or we were focused on the diaspora, but that actually catalyzed it into something much greater than that. And that we had 3 major national consultations within from July of last year to the end of the year. That ended with the commitment by the Ministry of Labor in conjunction with the diaspora unit of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including major stakeholders like the University of Guyana and the private sector bodies, to form a manpower unit, which will be managed by the Ministry of Labor, that would look into the shortages and the labor needs of the country. They will be working with other agencies to do the different surveys, manpower surveys and needs, and fill it. Not just with just the local skills and retooling Guyanese people to fill those roles. That's of course a priority, but really focusing on how the diaspora can actually fill the gaps that are actually coming out. out of all of the economic development that we're seeing, whether that be in academia, whether it is in the technical or the manufacturing sector, in the oil and gas, or even in a plethora of sectors that we consider to be the non-oil sectors. So we will be hearing, or we will share more information on that unit when the time comes, because as it stands, we've gone through the terms of reference and the governance structure. So it's just now for us to make the final presentation to the Ministry of Labor, and then they will proceed to activate that unit, and that unit is going to be in engagement with all the stakeholders. Basically, it's how do you address the gap. The unit has been very active in engaging lots of the agencies themselves, and the agencies have been engaged in the unit as to how do we tap into the diaspora to get some of the key skills that are needed. Most recently, yesterday, a key bank reached out to me to say, how can we get or post some of our vacancies? We need a specific skill set within the diaspora. So what I've advised them to do is to do the requirements, share it in a way that we can blast it out to the entire diaspora with a QR code, so that whoever is interested and would have had that prerequisite skill can contact the bank directly for that. There's another major company in the oil and gas sector that contacted us to say that they have a very senior position that's available. Pays very handsomely too, I should say, and they wanted to know how they can tap into the diaspora, because they were looking to fill that position with a Guyanese, whether local or even from the diaspora, and that was to help them keep in be compatible with the local content requirements, basically. But I'm talking about a senior position here. So all of these companies are coming to the unit basically to say that we have positions. There are some of them we can't find the skills in Guyana. Would like to utilize the services of the unit to reach into the global diaspora, and how can we get those skills, basically. But what we realize is happening is us, and Patricia would have hinted with it, that sometimes, and this is not just an investor perspective, but sometimes job seekers in the diaspora may not know where to find all the information that they need as to where are all the jobs available. And indeed, people would go to different sites or different companies specifically. What we're looking at with the formation of the manpower unit is really to amalgamate all of these efforts, basically all the vacancies from different companies going to one place, all the sectors that have needs will be posted in one location, so that anybody within the diaspora from any part of the globe can actually log on to one section or one website or one agency and see everything. But of course, everybody's pulling into that basically and sharing information. So that's one area of it when it comes to the labor and how do we plan to bring in more of the skills that we are seeing with very little efforts from the unit or any agency, a high interest from the diaspora to do two things: to return and offer their skills. And this is what we're working on. How do we streamline that into a structure and that makes it easier for them to assimilate themselves or reintegrate themselves into Guyana? And of course, there's the other element to this whole diaspora engagement, which is the investment part of it. So I was quite intrigued to hear again the previous speaker talk about not just the macroeconomic variables that makes Guyana an attractive point, a destination, investment destination, but also that talks about the infrastructure and the incentives that are being made available for people to come back and to invest. More specifically, I'm going to speak on the diaspora because we've been dealing mostly with the investors, the diaspora investors that are being coming there. And I can tell you, Professor, there has not been a shortage of people interested from the diaspora and invested in Guyana. Most of them have an interest in the non-oil sectors, whether it's agriculture or it's tourism services, even in the healthcare sector. We're seeing a lot of them actually showing an interest in it. For those who were following the work of the unit, the year actually started out with us launching the very first project and actually having the first sought turn-in for the year, and that would have been for our golf project, which is a Guyanese Canadian family is investing $3 million to develop a professional golf course, and that's to the tune of $3 million. We will be launching very soon another project by two couples from Canada as well, Guyanese in origin, and they're going to be launching a project that's aimed more at training young people in various skills, equipping them with actual with certain skills that are needed within the country. And then we are expecting to launch very soon another project from one of our Guyanese in one of the Caribbean islands that'll be launching a project to the worth of $5 million US. So we are seeing quite a lot of that taking place in the country. But on why it's high, and the unit has been a sort of like a nuclei. We've been given a lot of information to the diaspora who've been returning and contacting us to say, what are the steps? Who are people that you can recommend us to talk to, whether they be lawyers or people within, let's say, the immigration support services that we need to talk to get persons who, or to get work permits for people we need to come in. We have given guidance from the very first time we get an interest, and we determine that that investor, the diaspora investor, is actually serious, and we work it through that entire system, including follow up, to make sure that the project is being moved from one level to the next, and the issue is being dealt with, not just with the diaspora and the agency, but we come in and we make an input into that. Basically, one of the ways that we help in that too is to bring together all of the stakeholders that deals with diaspora, whether it be documentation or also with lands or with the regulatory bodies. We have quarterly meetings with them. We share information from the diaspora, that issues that affects them, and then we also get from those agencies where are the challenges, or what have they seen that is causing a problem for diaspora to return and to get their project through. Again, all of that in the interest of making business easy to do in Guyana. So we've been taking a very proactive approach to removing some of the barriers and bureaucracy, and to make it seamless and to make doing business very easy in Guyana. Not to say that there aren't some delays in some of the processes, some perhaps understandable, some maybe not understandable. And we did say that when we launched the Gulf project, that there may be some delays here and there, depends on how application run, and particularly if you're particularly in an area of seeking for land, because we know everybody's looking for land, and the government has to be very wise in how it allocates land for different projects. You've got many needs, competing needs for land, basically. So it's not a process you just get one application, start processing immediately. So of course we have to bear certain things in mind, and of course we are seeing lots of our project come into fruition, and we're very happy about that. So indeed, we've been taking a very proactive stand to make doing business easier in Guyana a lot easier, and that's from the business element of it. One of the things I want to say, Professor, before if you want to ask anything further in that or close, we are more than happy to engage diaspora, whether they're interested in bringing back a skill to Guyana with all that's happening, and we know they can make a very valuable contribution because there are certain skills that are just not here. And of course, we've seen some of them come back to invest in not just working or investing, but in equipment. We have several diaspora members that have come back, and they have literally opened academies like fabrication schools or welding schools, basically, and they're teaching higher levels of welding than the traditional one that are being done here. So they're contributing to equipping locals to fill the gaps, or to actually take up a lot of the opportunities that are coming up there. So those are some of the key areas there. But when it comes to perhaps having an increased number of investments within Guyana from the diaspora, two of the key things I can point out right off the bat for them to take stock of is they have to be serious about what they're doing. Oftentimes, we get quite a lot of people that come in very curiously to ask, what are the areas of opportunities? Where are the areas we can invest in? There is no shortage of information on that. There are no shortage of opportunities in all of the sectors for anybody to get that to take grasp of. There's no shortage whatsoever. The problem that we have is that we don't, this is our experience over the years of dealing with diaspora. It's a lot of people are not, they have not thought out that project completely. So they may come with some amount of financing or some amount of systems, and they start it, and then they come to the point where, okay, how do we get our markets? They haven't developed that part of it, or how do you sustain that business? And that's a part where they begin to start, dipping in terms of their investment. So we don't want people to go back to say, well, we never got the opportunity to be prosperous or to benefit off of what's going on in the country, but just that the plans were not exactly fully thought out. Many persons would have come, and we've expended a lot of time and energies in helping quite a lot of investors get to some point of realization, and then the investors come back and tell us, oh, we don't have enough money to actually do that. And then we're like, okay, well, these are things you need to think of in advance before you actually come in and put in a proposal. So apart from that, I can tell you that the unit has been working very hard to, again, remove some of the barriers to help make things easier for people, and addresses some of the key areas that the diaspora can have significant input in what's going on in Guyana.
So that's a really good, succinct narrative. And one question that sort of came in was whether or not there's a kind of quantitative sense of how many people from let's say from 2019, how many people from the diaspora have returned to, some form of employment within the context of Guyana. You know, what number of companies that have been put in place, etc. So just to give a quantitative sense to what's going on in that context.
So we are actually working on putting those statistics together and to quantify them, not just in terms of the number that would have returned, but also the worth that they would have brought to Guyana. Unfortunately, we will not be able to share that right now because that is actually ongoing. So we're looking at from 2020 onward, and then we're looking from 2019 and prior to that, so we can see comparatively what is happening, and then maybe what is the cause for the spike. So we can give information, for example, in terms of number of remigrants. But then again, if you're looking at remigrants, we have to know we have to segregate that to say how many actually are there, maybe just retiring, how many are actively in the workforce, how many are actively seeking jobs. So we need to quantify that, so we'll have more in-depth information that will guide policymakers as to what are some of the initiatives we should put going forward. But I can assure you, when we complete that, we'll be more than happy to share it because I think it's very useful information.
Yeah, thanks. So I was trying to introduce Stacy, but she seems to. Are you there, Stacy?
I am. I'm here.
Oh, okay. Your photo seems frozen. Are you there? Because Stacy is actually one of the people who I think I sort of hope that you're connected with Stacy in some substantive way, because I think she has been one of the pioneers in a sense of really kind of galvanizing the diaspora investment community. Most recently, I think you might be aware that she hosted a diaspora investment conference where she brought to Guyana a number of people from across the diaspora who had an interest in investment opportunities, and they were able to go around, and so what I wanted to do was to have her kind of give a sense of that experience, but she seems to be experiencing some kind of technical.
But Professor, before she comes on there, and maybe as she's getting ready to come on there, a reference to what you just mentioned there, yes, she did do an excellent conference in October 2023. We were part of that. We did share information on it, and I love the model that she did, that she actually brought people from Atlanta and a few other states to literally be on the ground. So that it wasn't a case that we went over there to sell them the opportunities for Guyana, but they were literally on the ground. So they were given tours of particularly the areas of interest that would have been more in the real estate and land acquisition part of it there, basically. And what I should mention there to show again how much Guyana is actually preparing for the diaspora to integrate them and to include them in the whole national development, as we have assessed, for example, and this is just because Stacy is actually the next speaker here, the entire Atlanta state, Georgia. So we were able to look at what are the kinds of skills that can come out of the state of Georgia. And then we can look at the Caribbean to say what kind of skill sets will come out, let's say, from Trinidad or Suriname or Barbados. So that way, when you look at the diaspora, although we're one people, we have diverse skills, and they're scattered across the globe. So when we engage persons like Stacy and her group, and they do these conferences, we're able now to know exactly how the diaspora in that particular area could be of significant benefit. And we're talking people who are highly skilled, highly educated, and can fill into some of those gaps, basically. So that will be one of the ways in which we engage people like Stacy.
Yes, so let me give two plugs. I should let you know that Atlanta, Georgia is one of my absolute favorite cities. The Guyanese community in Atlanta, Georgia, certainly, and the Caribbean community in Atlanta, Georgia, is one of the most entrepreneurial. It's one of extremely highly educated community, and it's a place that I'm quite fond of. And I do think that there are some just simply because of the asset base and the expertise base in Atlanta, that is someplace that really the diaspora unit should definitely drill deeply on. Now, Stacy seems to be having some challenges. So what I'll do is David, if you can come in at this moment and kind of broadly give a sense of a summing up, and we will just wait for a moment to see how what happens with Stacy in this context. So,
Thank you, Rod.
any
This was really very very useful, and I hope our audience it realizes the great value we are getting from Guyanese and Caribbean women on this program and on this subject, which is traditionally male dominated, as we know. So I think this is even more important. I think I'm not sure there's much summing up to do. I think, and I was going to mention the Atlanta, the Guyana Destination Now program that Stacy ran in October, because we don't have a dearth of programs with the diaspora in their countries. But what I think was critical of that program was taking the diaspora to Guyana, just the same way as the oil and gas industry takes companies to Guyana, and many others sectors are doing that, because at the end of the day, you have to get on a plane, go there, and really figure it out for yourself. And yes, it's great when Rosalinda comes to a program, or Joel, or Peter Ramsarup, or the minister, whether we're doing it in New York or Washington or London, as we did last year. But at the end of the day, the value is bringing these people to the market and making sure on the ground they can figure things out. And on that point, and we've discussed this umpteen webinars now, the challenge remains, and I just had a session with a team separately of investors last week. The problem with setting up business and setting up financing and bank accounts in Guyana remains extraordinary. It is not only for Guyana. This is something that's being affected throughout the Caribbean and many other markets, but we are beginning to see it as a disincentive, particularly for small companies and for the diaspora coming in, and just trying to set that up as the key requirement to be a bona fide business there. We've discussed this in various webinars. Joel has been on them. We've even had Demerara Bank, and there seems to be this sort of circular problem between the regulatory situation with the central bank and the private banks, and then of course all these anti-money laundering requirements coming from the banking industry in North America and in Europe, and it's all just even crazier when any one of us sitting down with a social security number and an address can open an online account in any bank in the United States without even going to show up or showing an ID or anything like that. So we've got to figure something out where we break that logjam, particularly in the case of the diaspora, where these are already U.S. citizens with accounts in U.S. banks, and that should be something that should be able to be worked out somehow to facilitate the process. Because again, as I mentioned at the beginning, a major global like Exxon or Chevron or Marriott, they're not going to have any problem. But again, Manchester Trade going in and having problems and we're talking about people waiting months to open a bank account in order to get businesses up and running. I think that's going to be a key area. I'm really happy on the manpower unit. Concerns with the name Manpower, but we can deal with that separately. But that's critical because that's bringing together exactly what you need: the skills, the people, where are they needed, and help on that facilitation. And maybe we need something like a bank setup unit or something like that, where the banks and the government can streamline that for particularly small businesses coming in. Let me just leave it at that, because that's something that's really holding back for entrepreneurs. And needless to say, it's also holding back Guyanese business people in Guyana, not just the ones coming in as foreign investors.
Yeah. So actually, I want to piggyback on this while I wait for Stacy, to get here again. Tracy asked the question about support for local entrepreneurs, you know, so startup and scaling the businesses. I know there's an investment trust that does some kind of thing of this sort. But uh, what's your sort of sense of the level of support for this kind of thing, Joel? And have you seen this in the work that you're doing uh, uh, at this moment? Sort of.
Just before Joelle comes in, Professor Stacy's trying to get in. She says only you can let her in.
Okay, good. She's back. Okay, good. So I got her. Good. Okay. So I guess you will just go ahead and tell us a little bit about the conference.
Okay. I'm so glad that I have this opportunity to talk. Rosalinda provided a great segue into the other side of what we're doing. So I've worked consistently with Rosalinda, and I'm a diaspora Guyanese in the Atlanta market. And we recognize those issues that everyone on the panel identified, that there is definitely a deficit, but how do we engage the diaspora to help to solve the issues that is needed, specifically around subject matter expertise, manpower, and investing? My group is Destination Guyana now, and we had a conference, and so we had a phased approach. The first part of the process was what we call awareness and education, where we work with the diaspora unit and many other stakeholders within country. And then we engage, working with you, Terrence, doing live webinar, live in-person engagements with the diaspora community. And for us, it's not just about the diaspora, it's also creating awareness within the business industry across the U.S., what opportunities exist within Guyana. So that's awareness and education, putting on information seminars, talking to the people, providing resources. That's the first part that's being done across the diaspora here. And then phase two for us was the conference. Now we're going to take you to Guyana. We're going to go in country, and some of the issues and challenges that you've been dealing with from the outside as someone in the diaspora that's trying to get things done, dealing with the lack of conformity across uh, ministries, dealing with the inability to be able to establish a bank account. Looking at the real transformation on the ground, looking at different segments. So our conference addressed those issues, not just oil and gas. We dealt with other sectors, ICT, mining, education, um, uh, different sectors, and had people come in country and brought those different stakeholders into one room, into one place where we can and the banking industry. It was amazing to see that people came in, were able to leave the country within a week with brand new passports and birth certificates, and setting up businesses and being able to get information, get bank accounts, because what you were getting an opportunity to address the concerns that were coming from the investor and diaspora community, get the heads of agencies and the stakeholders in the same room and see how we can solve those problems there while we're there. And then being able to now leave with point of contacts that are able to replicate this going back in country to the United States. And so that is for me. And then part three for us is implementation. How do we then, as Rosalinda say, be a source to identify the people who are needed in these subject matter expertise areas, being able to help people to establish all the requirements for local content certification, being able now to work with housing and lands and surveys and all these different ministries to address how do we deal with housing? How do we deal with, as a diaspora Guyanese, what is the best way to come in country and be successful? And so we replicated and we continue to do that work and continue to gain partners and resources to build it out in a significant way. And for us, the experience in the conference was, it's unbelievable the kind of synergy that was created there, and the ability to partner and collaborate to even scale on opportunities that exist. And so our goal is to continue to engage people. Now we're looking at not just the Guyanese diaspora, but how do we continue to build and grow this? So we're going to do it again and again and again through that process. So you start with awareness, you come in country, and you connect with the stakeholders, and then you help those people who are serious about engagement, who are serious about either returning home as a remigrant, either or starting a business or investing. We want to deal with the people who are serious. How do we help them to actually implement these ideas?
No, I think I think first I have to say congratulations. I mean, when we I think talked in at some point in Atlanta, I don't know what now I'm forgetting. That was August, maybe in August,
That was
in
May. That was May.
May in October in Atlanta about that event. I thought it's clearly a wonderful thing, and I was just very thrilled to see the way that it operated. And I have to share sort of broadly. I have a colleague who's a high school friend named Nicholas Waldron, who's a veterinarian.
Yes, yes.
And so I shared with him a photo of him on the conference, and he said, "I didn't know you knew anything about this." And I said, "Well, I knew it was happening, and I knew who you were, and I knew what you were doing." So I really want to, and this is the sort of broad example of the work that I wanted to, in a sense, share with our viewers to say, you know, we're often in our approach to this business of diaspora engagement, in the business of investor relations with Guyana, we're often prone to a kind of a conflictual relationship, and so in as much as we can minimize that conflictual relationship and in a sense aim for partnership, there will be conflicts, but I think if we aim for partnership, then this is not an unreasonable way to pursue this. And so I wanted, to commend you on that, and to ask first off, what is the date for the Diaspora Engagement Investor Conference for 2024?
We're actually going to put the dates out next week because we're being asked to do two now. Uh, so we're going to do one before the summer and one again in October later in the year. So it's amazing the response that we've gotten. So we're asked to do two instead of one this year, and we're really excited about that. But I also wanted to mention, Terrence, that we in the diaspora too, we got to do a better job of allowing people, particularly, I say this, my generation, I'm 51, and our parents, did a horrible job of keeping us connected back to Guyana. I only did so because I still had family, brothers, and cousins and stuff in Guyana. But we also have to engage our children. I mean, my 29-year-old and 22-year-old, and Rosalinda will tell you this, they came to Guyana and participated in the conference. And the kids, they were amazed. Both my children are interested in investing in Guyana, owning property in Guyana, getting involved in business in Guyana. Both my children work within my business. And so it was amazing to see their reaction coming to Guyana and having that on the ground experience. So I want us to understand that it's not just about our contemporaries, but we have to engage the young people because they bring a innovation and ideas and a whole way of viewing coming into Guyana as second generation people who were kids who were born in the United States, but still have a lot of nostalgia and loyalty to this place that their parents are from and wanting to participate. And I don't think we do a good enough job in engaging that the millennial and Gen X population because we're so focused on to me my age group the over 45, and so I really want us to do more around how do we engage the young people because they're willing. One thing that I've learned about them, they're very transient and they're willing to move and go wherever. They're not as tied to a particular place as we are. And so my children, I started a business in North Carolina. My daughter graduated college in May and moved to North Carolina to work in the business there. It was nothing for her. It was, it was easy. So they're really interested in coming to Guyana and being there. And both my kids indicated that they would want to be involved in any business that I do there.
No, I think you have the audience certainly supports what you've been saying, So and certainly something which David and I we have tried to do, which is to reach out to young people in university clubs and to really get them the sort of information that we're broadly trying to share here. I want to just now perhaps when we finally start talking, we lots of issues sort of emerge. I wanted to just go back to one question, and this one is directed to you, uh, Rosalinda. It's from Peter Amreka, and it's something that so some of our folks have long had this vision of this IOM report, and so is this something that you guys have completely gone away from? Is this something that is there that has any currency? Uh, you know, this IOM report that was supposed to kind of come out about diaspora policy broadly. I noted that in the introduction you said there was a report of some sort, and you decided that you wanted to have a different think about how you approached the broad diaspora policy, and then I wanted to open this to both Joel and to Patricia in the sense of this experience of Kuwait and Qatar vis-a-vis we'll say in quotes manpower. uh what are some of your thoughts around how Guyana might more effectively source the manpower? What are some of the models? Is there a regional model for how we might do this? I mean, what happened in the moment when Trinidad and Tobago, was there a migration from various islands? You mentioned this ferry, and I had the thought, yeah, this ferry might provide a very good way to sort of move people around in the Caribbean in a much easier fashion and a much cost-effective fashion. So maybe first to you, Rosalinda, around this IOM report, and then to you, Patricia, and then Joel, around the manpower issue. You're muted.
Sorry about that. I apologize. Very quickly, first of all, David, that's not the name of the unit. I was just using that for the sake of discussion, so you could breathe a sigh of relief. Secondly, with respect to the IOM report, and thank you for that, Peter. We'll catch up very soon. No, I was not referring to that report when I first spoke on the issue. It's a very different report. I'm familiar with the IOM report, but I'll have to look into the update in terms of what next in terms of information, because as you would have seen, quite a lot has changed in terms of the needs of Guyana and the different sectors. So whether that will be totally reflective of the needs with respect to labor and maybe how the diaspora can play. Maybe it'll be very well in terms of a reference or as a starting point or something to have some sort of continuum. But it was not the report, and I'm going to have a look in terms of where we are as a policymakers, are we going to do a new manpower study or report in terms of the needs? But I can just say they're a good point for us to reference and to have discussions and to begin to address some of the needs that we would have had. But I cannot speak to at this point in time in terms of how updated it would be. But I can certainly get some information and get back to this forum and as well as Peter separately on that one there.
Thanks. On the question of Kuwait and Qatar and the manpower experience, Patricia, do you want to add anything in this regard?
Well, we know that those markets are dominated by Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Indian labor, and to some extent, services sector, the Filipino. That's where their labor is coming from, and clearly that's their environment, that's their homeland. Whereas in Guyana, the homeland will certainly be Brazil, Venezuela, and the Caribbean, and perhaps to some extent Colombia as well. So I would think that what will likely happen if one is not structured in the way that you approach things, that is where the manpower is going to come from. Of course, the fact is that you see Filipinos in every part of the world. Today you see Indians in every part of the world. When I was living in New York quite recently, it was amazing to me that from the first time I was there to when I was living there, how many Indians were now living in New York. So it probably will not be limited to our homeland around us. But I think it's very important that a structured approach to how the immigration is managed, to ensure that there is some kind of homogeneous way in which things work, because I've seen in Doha, I've seen in Dubai, I've seen the kind of ghettos of labor, where labor lives and how labor is treated. It's not what we in the Caribbean are accustomed to in terms of the way that we manage and treat labor. So I would think that we would want, knowing that this is something that's going to happen, we need to manage that process. We need to know what it is that we want to do. We need to plan for it. I mean, we in Jamaica here, with the expansion of our tourism industry, what it has meant, because we haven't planned for where the workers live, we have squatter settlements from which these hotel workers have to live in. So let's not make some of the same mistakes that have been made throughout the Caribbean, throughout the rest of the world. Let's manage it. And I'd say that would be what I would say about everything that's happening in Guyana today. Things are happening at such a pace that the capacities are not there in the government. And oh dear, I'm sorry, my phone keeps ringing and I need to turn it off.
I know it's been difficult to get you, so I can understand why.
Yeah. So unfortunately, we tend to wait until things have become a problem before we deal with it. But dealing with it up front is not something that we can do, and we need to stop and think about it and plan properly for the future. So that's my advice.
So Joel, just a quick word on stopping and thinking about it and planning for the future on this manpower issue. How do you think we're doing?
I think, from my knowledge of things happening on the policy front in the private sector and in other quarters of our country. So there is education, there is scholarships, there is the oil and gas companies making some investments. Um, Other business support organizations, including private companies that provide business support services, have different types of educational development programs that people take advantage of. So it's a lot of things, a lot of activities, a lot of things. If we were to look at it holistically across across the country, not only government, not only what the government is doing, but what private sector and business support organizations are doing as well. And of course, Rosalinda would have referenced from the diaspora aspect in terms of the broad national strategy. The overarching strategy of the country is to we don't have the skills here. We go firstly to the desired the desirous thing to do is firstly the diaspora, then CARICOM, then the rest of the world. So I mean, strictly speaking, the human resources problem is not going to fix overnight. It takes time to develop skills and competencies. I heard you ask about the IOM study. Based on the last IOM study that was done, that study estimated that we need at least 100,000 more people. But strictly skills, and the study outlined the different skill sets: engineering, technical, ICT, accountants, and so on. So with that, and based on my estimate, I think over the medium term, we probably would need about 200,000. When you look at, as all of us agree on this panel, the dynamism with which the country is advancing, we probably need another 200,000. Not necessarily people. I think we have the people resources in terms of our labor force participation rate is just 50%. So we need to get more of our people involved in the labor market as well, to participate in the labor market and to equip them with the tools and skill set necessary. So it will take a lot of work. It will take a lot of work. I think we have a good start.
So we're we have a good start, but we're coming on the end. I just looked up and saw it's 56. So we're going for 4 minutes more. So I guess on your question, Eden Gajraj sort of noted, maybe just a quick response. Uh, you talked about the gold program earlier, but you talked about the technical center, certainly the one at Port Morant that's being facilitated by the ExxonMobil folks. Uh, is there a broad sort of strategic thing that's there around apprenticeship programs to train? You talked about the labor participation rate, and to train unemployed workers to, do. I know that there was this program where workers were being paid broadly to work, but not in a kind of like focused way. So any thoughts on that real quick before we transition to kind of a final remarks?
I'm not aware that we have more or less an apprenticeship program per se as part of the strategy. Maybe we do. Maybe it's in the making. I don't know. Maybe Rosalinda might be in a better position than me to speak to that.
Yes, there is actually an apprenticeship program, but what's going to be happening is they're going to expand it because it started out as a small scale project, but they're based on the consultations we've had last year, with lots of persons asking for it. It's going to be expanded. It's been run by the Ministry of Labor.
Okay, so we're at the end, so we have 3 minutes left. So I'll give you in this order: Stacy, Patricia, Joel, and then Rosalinda, a kind of 1 minute remark, and then David, you get to say thank you on behalf of the GBJ and the CPC. So you get your final 1 minute, Stacy. You're muted.
Thank you so much, Terrence, for inviting me on the program. I want to continue to say to Rosalinda and all the folks there that are working towards diaspora engagement that there needs to be a higher level of participation inside these countries, to get the awareness out. I think part of the challenge with getting the diaspora really engages. A lot of it is just webinar, but we find that when we do in-person events where we're able to have conversation with stakeholders that are in country and have a higher level of accuracy in information that's being disseminated, that tends to work more. And we're going to do more to continue to bridge that divide where we're getting more of the stakeholders in country here in the US, and then we're bringing the diaspora in country there to meet with those stakeholders.
Thank you. Patricia?
Okay, thank you. I think my word of advice is about the capacity of the government to be able to manage this process, to have transparent mechanisms that everybody can understand. This is the process if I want to invest. These are the steps that I have to take, and that it's not a focused things that you have to know a minister, you have to know someone. It has to go through a tiny government process. We need transparent processes. We need to build a trust and confidence in those institutions to be able to make the right decisions, so that it does not become a funnel with a few people making decisions on investment processes. So the building of these organizations, the processes that they need to put in place, and the establishment of rules and regulations that everybody can understand, so that things can move in a faster way, and that we're clear on what is available, who it's available to, and what the processes are. Because the pace at which things are going to move, there's going to be a huge logjam and frustration building unless we can build the capacity and capability of institutions to run in a transparent and non-corrupt manner. So this is my one last word of advice.
It's an important word of advice. Joe, how do we parse that word of advice? The importance of institutions to be able to run in a transparent, non-corrupt manner, but also to kind of ensure that we don't kind of devolve into a funnel, and that there is some broad reliability of process across. You get the second to last word on this regard.
I can say with absolute certainty, and the government has articulated this transparently on many occasions, that they are not unaware of their limitations in governance. They're well aware of the limitations, including those articulated by the previous speaker and her word of advice, and they are taking actions over the long term, because those are issues that are not going to resolve overnight. Take, for instance, the institutional building, trust in the institution and strengthening institutions. It's twofold. One, it's a lot of bureaucracy in the system that is leading to the bottleneck. We have to cut down the bureaucracy. We know that. That is the biggest challenge, well-documented challenge. The solution for that is investment in a digitization strategy, an ICT strategy to digitize all of the public service. Then to complement that, you need to build out the human resources. And those aspects are included in the overall strategy of governance to make the necessary investments in that regard. So in the final comment, yes, the government, credit to the government, they are well aware of the limitations, all of the limitations and risks, and those issues are being prioritized and being confronted, to be addressed over the long term.
Yeah, thanks. So Rosalinda, you get the last word from the panelists here. As since we are today, we're taking advantage of our diaspora focus, and so what's your last thought for diaspora investors? And if someone wanted to know whether or not you could provide financing enhancements if the banks in Guyana are formed, what's your last word for at least the last word for the first part of the year? And then we will focus on how we engage and deepen the engagement over the course of the year. But today.
Excellent. First of all, thank you so much for having me in the program. I think it was an amazing discussion with lots of information here. So thank you so much, Professor Blackman and David. We really appreciate this here. It's been very, very informative. I'm quite sure your audience also found it very informative. Just very quickly, I really want to commend all the speakers, because they really built a very good foundation relevant to your topic of Guyana being a choice destination for investments, but not just for foreigners, but also for a diaspora who's interested in coming in. You've heard extensively about the stability, the macroeconomic elements that makes Guyana very attractive. As Patricia said, also reference an international organization where we are in terms of our growth and where we're going to be in terms of growth. Guyana looks very, very attractive. In terms of geopolitical issues, basically, those are things that we know will forever be thorns in our sides, but it's how governments and policymakers skillfully maneuver all of that. I mean, there's no country or no part of the world that has been totally bereft of any of these sort of threats in one way or the other, whether it be political, natural, or any of the sort. So we just have to, learn how do we adapt and how do we address all of this. And I think we're doing quite well. Kudos to the authorities, the government, for doing quite well in how they navigated it, all in an effort to assure investors, foreign and diaspora, even our locals, and we're here on the ground all the time. So we know we are living it daily. We have confidence in the country and where it's going, and we've seen locals are massively invested in it. So that tells you indeed that the foreigners as well as diaspora can continue to bring their investments to Guyana, because all that they're looking forward to will happen. But just as a quick word of caution, Guyana is now transitioning from where it was before, not something that we were very proud of in terms of our economy and perhaps social issues. But now we're seeing the metamorphosizing of a brand new country. That takes time, and there's a plan that has to be followed for it to take place. Infrastructural development, social issues, building of institution, strengthening of our capacities, building our labor force. It all takes time. But when you look carefully, you can see that our policymakers are actually touching on every single one of them so that we can build the kind of Guyana, the one that addresses the needs of people and also their requests, and also at the same time enable investors to come to Guyana, because they'll also want to make sure that energy, infrastructure, institutions are all working the way they want it to work, so that they can invest in it there. So I just want to say that, and also I can end by saying there, look out for the budget, which is coming out on Monday, so you can know very well what are the next steps for the country as actually the budget is going to speak to perhaps all of these topics basically that we've discussed here in greater details and with some finances attached to it. So that's what I'm going to say and end in.
Well, thank you. It's always good to have a kind of optimistic note, and so we will look precisely for the budget of the diaspora unit within the context of this new budget round to see where it goes. David, say thank you on behalf of our colleagues here, and
thank you all for joining us. This has been excellent, and just to emphasize Rosalinda's point, as we've been saying for all these webinars over 2 years, this is work in progress. Indeed, as she says, you're building a brand new country from where it was before. Both people in Guyana, people who've been out. My first visit was 1982, and maybe we'd need a whole webinar just to discuss what Guyana was like in 1982. But it's work in progress. Thank you all for joining us. Our next episode is Wednesday, February 14th at 10:30 a.m. And we will be touching on the topic of fiscal stability, which coming with the budget next week and what the government is planning will be very, very relevant. So I hope you all join us and stay in touch and have a wonderful new year. Thank you for being with us today.
yeah, thank you again. And let me just say, we did not plan fiscal stability to coincide with the budget. So just so that folks know, it's just purely coincidence, but we planned this over a long period of time. And this is the one that emerges now. And so certainly we will take advantage of the budget. But there was no causation, but mere correlation.
Serendipity. Thank you all so much.
Have a wonderful day, folks. Take care, and thank you again very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was Very nicely done. Bye.